Welcome to the Know Why podcast. Today, in our series on family formation, we're talking about the truth between Tradwife and trans. Now, you may think that those two cultural phenomenons have nothing to do with each other, but the truth is they actually can share a misunderstanding about what it means to be a woman. So we recently did an episode on healthy masculinity, and today's has to do with healthy femininity and really understanding what that means, because as we've stated, healthy marriages are the foundation of healthy families and healthy cultures. And you can't have a healthy marriage between a man and a woman if you don't even know who you are as a man or a woman. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And joining us for this conversation is Rachel Schroder. Welcome to the Know Why podcast, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me, Liberty. I'm so glad to join today.
Yes, I'm excited for our conversation. Let me introduce you a little bit further. Rachel is a speaker and advocate in defense of life, marriage, and the family, both in America and abroad. Chasing her love for travel and a call to love the vulnerable, she has helped launch international pro-life youth groups in South America and India by training students to form pro-life teams in their schools. Rachel's writing or interviews have appeared in Fox News, The Federalist, LifeSite News, and others. After studying history at Hillsdale College with a focus on cultural trends in the American family, she has continued to use her voice to rekindle love for family values in the U.S. and beyond. Rachel currently works as a research associate at the Catholic University of America, where she examines the stories of America's largest families in response to declining birth rates. So again, thanks for being here, Rachel. And just to get us started off, I will link the article in our show notes, by the way, that you've written for the New Guard Press. But there is an anecdote that you open with having to do with a friend of yours who previously identified as transgender and is now detransitioned. So can you share that with us?
Yes, I had a conversation with this individual, lovely, lovely girl a while back, and it helped open my eyes to a very interesting connection that we see that is very unexpected between an underlying assumption in the in very sort of traditional understandings of there's sort of the divide between men and women, which is true but misunderstood in a certain modern manifestation. And on the other hand, the transgender movement, which seeks to erase sex differences altogether. So in this conversation, I was speaking with this girl who shared with me that growing up, she was a bit more of a tomboy and had, less stereotypical interests as a young girl. And because of certain cultural voices that she was hearing, she began to see herself as a boy. Because if being a woman means you like pink and you like, playing with your tea set and these things that we stereotypically consider might be of interest to young girls, if those things are true and she didn't like those things, maybe she wasn't a girl after all. And so she started participating in men-only activities at her college, but finally opened her eyes to realize that just because she didn't have interests that were the same as other women did not mean that she was any less of a woman. And so she began to rediscover her femininity and now embraces her unique interests as the woman that God created her to be.
Wow. Yeah, that is a beautiful story. And I think one that a lot of people identify with. I remember saying years ago as this kind of the cultural contagion, which I'm sure we'll cover in another episode more deeply, of so many people starting to identify as transgender. I said something like, I was a tomboy growing up. I loved rough and tumble type activities, but my parents never said, oh, well, you must be a boy because of that. Or no teacher or anybody else ever said, well, it's probably because you're a boy. I knew I was a girl. I liked what I liked. And I think we've kind of lost that. And that has
I
really,
was the same way growing up.
yeah.
Wow.
And can you imagine, how confusing it already can be as a child or adolescent. And then to get that message that like, okay, something's really wrong with me and I was made
hmm
incorrectly because of these personality preferences. So, and we'll talk more about personality here in a
Absolutely.
moment. But, that's kind of one side. A lot of people listening, when you say tradwife, they probably know it you mean. But for others who maybe they aren't as online or on Instagram, maybe they just think, oh, is that a wife with traditional values? But it's a little bit different. So can you kind of explain this phenomenon that has taken on the term tradwife?
Absolutely. So, the Tradwife movement is a culture of men and women who are resisting the toxic elements of femininity in its modern form. They're saying that actually, no, we prioritize family. We think that having complementarity within our marriage relationship is important and something that we want to specifically and intentionally seek to build in the context of our relationship. Um, but something that characterizes this specifically and kind of has earned it this title, trad wife, the trad wife family, the trad wife lifestyle, is specifically this strict separation of labor. There's this emphasis on particular gender roles. The father is the breadwinner, and the woman is the homemaker. And this is nothing out of the ordinary. This is something that we've seen in, more or less in different forms throughout, any age in history. But something that's made this lifestyle sort of controversial in the modern day is that in the 19th century, as the Industrial Revolution kind of displaced production from the home, we began to see the difference in homemaker versus breadwinner more clearly.
Mm,
So it used to be that mothers and fathers would work together for the needs of the household
yeah.
together
Hmm.
because the economy the economy of production was centralized in the home. But as factories and industry increased in the 1800s, you saw many women joining their husbands in factories, but you also saw many women, especially of higher classes, kind of the bourgeois class, becoming these stay-at-home wives. And this has been unsatisfying for some modern women whose families can afford to have only one income, where women feel this desire to produce something, to apply their talents in the economy of production as well. And so now we have this question: how should families divide labor? And for some families, it works really, really well to have, single income, have the father work as the breadwinner and the mother stay home with the children. But for other families, this isn't as possible, and you see families with two incomes. But we have to ask ourselves, like, is there something wrong with this? Is the trad wife lifestyle the only way to live? And my critique of this movement is if we were to say that this is the way every family should live. It's one healthy way to live, and it's one example of femininity to to receive the provision that God provides through your spouse as any wife should. But that looks different for every family. And something that I'm seeing culturally is that people are looking to the tradwife movement as the definition of femininity rather than as an example of femininity. And I believe that is wrong because I believe that some women are called to produce in the realm of economy outside of the family as it suits um, the ability of their family to uh, sort of spare their presence in the home to a certain degree. This depends upon the age of children, the needs of children, etc. But I think that we need to have a little bit more of an open-minded perspective when we look at families with two incomes, when we look at women who do work, because they can be just as feminine as the woman who wears an apron all day.
Hmm. Yeah. So well said. And I really appreciate you bringing kind of the historical context into that because I think for a lot of people, maybe on the right and the left, when you think about tradition, there's kind of this like 1950s ideal that's like, we think about Leave It to Beaver or something like that. And not realizing that that in itself, like that dynamic was fairly new, and just in terms of kind of
Mhm.
the, like you said, the division of labor within the household and the family setup. And so that's helpful to understand. Another thing you say in the article is that this tradwife trend or lifestyle is very aesthetically driven. And it's true that also we have to keep in mind on places like TikTok and Instagram, it really is all about aesthetics. And so we're often seeing highlight reels or kind of performances, even if people are living, more of a traditional lifestyle. That's important to keep in mind. But just kind of, I don't know, expound on that a little bit. You said that that's the definition of femininity rather than the example, or at least people see it as that. But why do you think people are saying, well, that's the definition of femininity? And how do we create a more well rounded definition?
Mhm. Well, the Tradwife movement is reactionary. It's a reaction to modern feminism. And I think whenever we are replying to a movement that is wrong and toxic, like I believe modern femininity is in so many of its manifestations, and its it- just acceptance of abortion culture and acceptance of, I believe, often just women neglecting sometimes needs of their children in the home when maybe they should be spending more of their time with their own family. Um, there is this need that both men and women alike are seeing, that sometimes families are being placed on the wayside. Sometimes life at home is something that occurs in the, hour when you wake up and when you go to bed, rather than something that permeates the whole life. So men and women don't want modern feminism. Many men and women deeply oppose this. And this is where the tradwife movement has arisen. It's men saying, actually, I would like a woman who is feminine and who defines herself as more than just her success at her career. And women who say, actually, I want to have children. And I don't want to be told that I'm some, oppressed or, not accomplished woman because I chose to use my time to invest in my children, to maybe educate them at home, to spend more time with them than a 9 to 5 career might allow for. So we have to understand a few things here. First, whenever you are reacting to something, there is this danger that in swinging the pendulum back, you're going to go too far. And I think that sometimes we have seen that in the Tradwife movement. I've seen this among um, women around me actually, where women are in striving for femininity, um, going for the aesthetics of the Tradwife movement rather than understanding what femininity actually is. So they pride themselves so much on, and this is a beautiful thing. Like, oh, I want to, wear this type of dress that sort of follows this aesthetic. But femininity is much deeper than that. And if we follow the aesthetics of reactionism, then we miss the deeper meaning of femininity that all women are called to, whether they are in a career, whether they're at home with their children, whether they're doing kind of a mix of both. So what is femininity, right? I think that's the heart of the question. Masculinity and femininity are the two different incarnations of the human person. Masculinity and femininity, this is kind of how John Paul II describes these two concepts. They are um, to to just draw from his sort of definition of the two incarnations of the human person. Masculinity and femininity are kind of the material form of the person. It's very much inseparable from our biology, but it is more than our biology. It's more than just our body and our material needs. It's more than just um, physically bearing children or physically providing for children in the case of fatherhood. It is the embodiment of the person. And so, how do we live femininity? It's by being most fully yourself. Now, how do you understand that? It is by discerning first, so who you are, which I think we can look at this kind of in three different strata. First, we are a human person made in the image and likeness of God. Men and women alike share this nature, which is understood in the Western tradition specifically on the basis of the rational faculty. In Genesis 2:23, we see when Adam greeted Eve, he said, "This is bone of my bone." Unlike the utilitarian relationship that can occur between man and beast, this was a new type of relationship, a relationship based on equality, equality of nature, equality in the nature of their soul, that of a rational being. And so, in order to understand complementarity in a relationship, we have to first presume this equality of nature. Now, rationality implies freedom, and freedom is inherently tied to responsibility. So, how do we discern our responsibilities? Now, that takes us to kind of this next strata of looking at our own bodies. Are we a man or are we a woman? And the transgender movement doesn't understand this because the transgender movement is based on the Gnostic heresy that the the sort of the soul alone, that the spiritual realm alone is the whole person. So what I feel that I am is who I am. So if my body does not correlate to that feeling, I must change my body to match it. But this is not what the Western tradition has held, which is that the human person is both material and immaterial, body and soul. So we know from our immaterial nature that man and women are equal on the basis of the rational faculty. But now we have to look at the fact that our bodies are different. So what does that mean? We see that we have particular like biological potencies, and potency points us toward act. So our bodies actually reveal to us our responsibility to be fruitful and multiply, which typically is something that we live out biologically. And in some cases, people um, live that out in a fundamentally spiritual way, like through fatherhood and motherhood of society around them by enlivening the lives, enlivening the souls of people around them in a way that isn't biologically tied. So people are called to that universally to foster, educate their children. That is a spiritual fatherhood and motherhood, as Carol Wojtyła would characterize it in his book, Love and Responsibility. But some people live this out apart from actually bearing children physically. But regardless, every person, whether they're a man, if they are a woman, they are called to motherhood in some way, the bringing to life of people around them, because of the woman's particular um, ability to understand the inner life of persons. That is part of the nature of femininity, to be able to seek and foster interpersonal interaction and understandings, emotional awareness that men have to work a lot harder to develop. And men have this grasp of the material world. They know how to sort of match means toward ends and are able to produce and work in a way that is more um, immediately clear to them. And so women have to kind of work harder to develop that side of the human nature. So with this biological understanding that men and women are called to respond and live according to their bodies and the natural inclinations that those lead us toward, we then can look to the realm of the individual man and woman in their relationship with each other. And this is really the bread and butter of complementarity. But this involves individual discernment of gifts and talents. And this will be different for every single person. So one problem of the Tradwife movement is that the Tradwife movement sort of characterizes vocation as a universal standard rather than looking at the very unique circumstances of individual couples whose complementarity will be linked to their individuality as persons and how they work together and how they discern their strengths and how to reply to their needs of their family accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so so well articulated, and I think that that's an explanation that a lot of people probably haven't thought of before. And it's and this is a point that you bring out in your article, but if you are solely focused on kind of the aesthetic appeal of the tradwife lifestyle and embracing that outward femininity and some of those traditional roles in the household, but that is your definition, then if somebody's individual talents or personality traits don't always align with that, or even circumstances, then it's like, okay, well, if that's the definition of being a woman or of being feminine, then I must not qualify. And
Hmm.
that is, even though these are so opposite extremes, that kind of is the same lie of the transgender movement, which is if I identify with a certain aesthetic or, personality trait, or I feel more feminine than maybe, others, then I must be a man, or, opposite. Because if it's just putting on an apron, well, then why can't a man put on an apron and say that he's a woman? And so it's really like you do have to get into the nuance and not just be reactionary. So I'd love to get your thoughts too
Yes.
on just, you know, you've already touched on kind of like the individual here, but I think it's good to recognize that there are generalizations. Like if as a woman you're listening and you're thinking, yeah, I do, even when you aren't biologically a mother, like women tend to have more of those instincts. And you said it really beautifully. I think of, being able to better understand and enliven, especially, people's inner lives. And,
Hmm.
men have different traits generally. There are exceptions to the rule, and something that Nancy Pearcey wrote in her book, Love Thy Body, which I'm sure other people have said the same thing, is that the whole range of human personality is open to both men and women. And so there are going to be personality traits that are generally more masculine or generally more feminine. But that alone, if you are the exception to the rule, or you're a woman who tends to be a little bit more assertive or a little bit more inclined to types of physical labor just because that's what you enjoy, then that doesn't mean that you're not a woman. You might not be have the kind of the stereotypical personality, but that's okay.
Right. No, you're touching on an issue that I think is part of the heart of the matter here, where we see people who don't fit the stereotype, and we want to be able to say women are like this and men are like this because we know that men and women are different, but each individual man and woman is very unique and not like many other women for a woman or many other men for a man. So how do we resolve that? And this has been a question that I've been mulling about over the past year. And I think finally put my finger on this in that just as within physical characteristics of men and women, you will see great divergences. I mean, even from a like biological standpoint, within each genotype, like each, XX, XY genotype, you have a variation in the um, emergence of the phenotype or the like secondary sex characteristics and things like that. You see differences in like size, shape, appearance. Each man and woman is different from every other. So why would we think that personality is going to be any different? That
Mm-hmm.
within women, we're not going to also see divergences in personality, and within men, we are also going to see divergences in personality. But the issue goes a lot deeper than that, and we have to go back to Genesis, I believe, to understand why this is so.
Mm-hmm.
So the scholarship of Deborah Savage is where I'm drawing this information from, and she is brilliant in exposing this issue and how it applies to men and women's interactions, like in a timeless capacity. She identifies that in Genesis, man was created first, And he had such a understanding, a primary exposure to the physical world that he was even tasked with naming the creatures. And it wasn't until after that point that Eve was created. So man had already discovered the kind of the outside world, the physical world, before Eve even entered the stage. And it kind of makes sense that men have this particular acute awareness of the physical world around them and how to, um, connect uh, means and ends, and that they're able to figure things out. They're generally more handy with tools, and they generally find themselves that they feel more fulfilled through physical labor even than women are in a lot of cases. Woman, on the other hand, was born into a hierarchy of being that already included another person. She never had a second of existence in which Adam did not already exist. And her first interaction with another human person was being gazed at and loved. And it makes sense that woman has this particular interpersonal understanding that men simply don't have. I mean, we sort of tease men sometimes for not having the emotional awareness that women have, but really it's just part of the beauty of complementarity that men have a perspective that women don't, and women have a perspective that men don't. But as we talked about before, how men and women share a human nature, these dispositions toward kind of the objective and the subjective are both to guide the individual toward human virtue. And Edith Stein uh, lays this out very beautifully when she says that Christ is the standard for human virtue, that men and women are equally called to develop. So, man's disposition toward the objective world makes it more intuitive for him to develop more outward facing virtues like courage. In women, with this particular aptitude for interpersonal relationship, makes it sort of easier for them to develop certain um, internal, interpersonal virtues such as compassion. But both men and women are equally called to develop these virtues. Women are most feminine, they are most themselves. Femininity is you being most yourself as your nature, as human, bodily woman, and individual. You are most feminine when you develop not only compassion but courage. And a man is most fully masculine. He is most fully himself when he develops not only courage but compassion. So when we see these differences within um, sort of personality and disposition between men and women, I think rather than seeing that as sort of this challenge to male female difference, we should see this as a reminder that men and women are going to have different levels of disposition toward different virtues, but everyone is called to develop all of these. It's not a problem if a man is like it's not necessarily a problem if a man is um, more inclined naturally to the virtues to which femininity disposes the woman, as long as he is also working to develop the virtues to which masculinity would generally dispose the particular man. And I just have to give credit to my dear friend Magdalena Kine, who's an up and coming scholar on this issue. And she helped me to understand this and in this universal call toward human virtue that helps us to realize that these differences in personality are beautiful and
Mhm.
simply testimonies to the individual person that God created each man and woman as.
Yeah, yeah, that's very, very beautifully stated, and a good reminder that as Christians, and we do this podcast from a Christian worldview. Most of all, we're called to be like Christ, and it's beautiful the way that men and women exhibit different aspects of God's nature so well, but it's all meant to ultimately point to Him. Um,
Mhm.
so I wanted to get your take on this too, and then I would love for you to recommend you've mentioned so many resources. And so for people that this piques their interest, I would love to get some things that people can write down and we'll include in the show notes too for further study. But um, I think that maybe, well, I know for sure that, as you stated as well, when you look at the far left, second wave feminism, the sexual revolution, you really kind of, I think, had a movement that said women are just like men, but that was the justification for saying we should have more rights, or we should be more valued by society. And we're no different than men. We can do the same thing as men. But in saying we're no different, it actually kind of erases the argument that you even need women in society. Because if there's no difference between men and women, then why does it matter if women are involved? Because everybody's the same. Women, when they are involved, tend to bring different insight and perspectives and things like that because of our different nature. So, would you say that maybe today, as we see it, there's kind of this dichotomy where one side maybe undervalues those, like the biological nature of women and the role that is so important that we play in the family and continuing on the human race. But then on the other hand, maybe the other side, in emphasizing that so much, undervalues the way that those traits that make us women are actually valuable to society as a whole.
Exactly. As you were touching on, the transgender movement overemphasizes the sort of spiritual dimension of the person and says that that is the whole person. And the transgender movement I'm sorry, the Tradwife movement at times overemphasizes the biological element of the person, that your vocation is strictly determined based on whether you have XX or XY chromosomes. But vocation is much more um, than just your biological capacities, right? So there's a couple of things at play here. And one thing that I think that we need to realize is that men and women are not the same in the workforce. They offer different things, even when they are working on the same task. Men have this particular perspective toward objective disciplines, an objective way of thinking that is beautiful, and women have a harder time developing. And women bring an interpersonal perspective to the workforce that men have a harder time providing. And so I think that we do a disservice to society to say that women should not be in the workforce, because many women, I believe, are called to be in the workforce because of their unique talents and ability to bring this compassionate interpersonal perspective to a culture that greatly needs it. But here's why the Tradwife movement is so compelling. Modern feminism has undermined the family. And I think for a lot of men who are looking for their trad wife, it's not that they necessarily want a woman in an apron, it's that they want a not feminist. So, how do we uncover the real need here that is spurring the trad wife movement? It's a need for a reclaiming of the dignity of the family. This is a call not just for women, but for men to be present to their children and attend to their needs, especially the emotional needs of young children whose psychological development is most pronounced in the first 3 years of life. They need the proximity of their primary caregiver. And that is something that we have to understand in the economy of rights and privileges in the workforce, because rights correlate to responsibilities. You have a right to do something because you have a responsibility to do that thing. And I am so grateful for the advice that I was given by one of my dearest mentors, Dr. Catherine Bacolic, who I am blessed to work for now, who told me God does not give his gifts in conflict. Our fertility is a gift. Our talents, which we apply in the workforce, is a gift. But these gifts are meant to be pursued in harmony, meaning higher things above lower things. That means you need to make sacrifices at your career to be with your children if you have children. You must not neglect them. But that also means that you don't necessarily need to stay home during your entire children's childhood. It could be that depending on the schooling choices that you and your husband discern, it could be a good idea at different points in your children's life to, have them in, different activities that would allow you to have the time to pursue your career. But I think the call is for men and women both to attend to the needs of their family and their children first. And the reason that's so important is because both the mother and the father are a child's first impression of God. And if they have an absent parent, they will believe that they have an absent God. So, yes, we must resist the extremes of modern feminism, but we must do so by reclaiming first principles, by understanding what is masculinity and femininity. What are my gifts and talents? But most of all, what are my responsibilities in life? Because that determines where I should apply myself with my time. I was speaking with Helen Alvarez, who um, is a pro-life leader, and she was helping me work through this myself as I was discerning the possibility of a legal career as someone who desires to be a wife and a mother. She said to me, it's not about balancing, it's about priorities. And that means that if you are given a call to, speak at a national event or um, speak at a very major political function or something of that scale, but the needs of your family or the needs of your children prevented you from being there, you should choose your family and their needs. And of course, this depends very much upon the prudence of the circumstances, but it's important for us to realize that this movement is in response to a real problem. And the solution to that problem is to reclaim the dignity of parenthood and a family while also realizing that that takes place within the discernment and full vocation of each individual person.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, so well said, Rachel. And I know we're about out of time and I want you to share your resources, but just a quick personal note that kind of, I think, underscores what you said. And again, this is a call for men and women. Like we've said so many times on the Know Why podcast, we were made for other people and to live in community, and as the body. And you can't do that if you're not willing to make sacrifices for those that you love and those that you are called to, which when you were in a family, you were called to serve your family. And, I had kind of a similar reckoning when I had just graduated college. I had the opportunity to intern and then work for a radio station in Washington, D.C. And as a journalism major, like that was the, like, okay, you've hit it, early on, like you got a job offer here at this place, like that's great. And the schedule at the time was just so non-conducive to family life. Just extremely late nights, extremely early mornings, no margin. And at the time I was engaged and I really wanted a family. And that was kind of hard because I also felt called to my career, but made the decision to, leave that position. We actually moved back to our home state, and I continued to work after having children in like a, kind of scaled back in capacity to part-time. And I was blessed with an employer that had that flexibility and valued family as well and allowed me to do that. But 10 years later, I am now at a place where I'm working for a Christian organization that is a radio ministry. And I actually, in addition to hosting the Know Why podcast, get to be a co-host on a Christian radio program that I grew up listening to that's even more aligned with my values than the radio station that I could have worked with back in DC. And it's just really, and my kids are older now, so I'm at a place where I can take on a little more responsibility, in terms of career. And it's just really neat to see how the Lord can move. And when you're saying not right now, because I'm going to prioritize my family goals, that does not mean not ever. It can mean that, okay, there are going to be doors that open later and opportunities later. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the now, both as men and women, that we're like, if I don't take this opportunity now, it's never going to come around again. And then we neglect the priorities that we should have in the moment. So that's just a little encouragement to anybody listening that, um, prioritizing your family is always the right thing to do. And I really believe the Lord blesses that.
I think there's just so much wisdom in that. And I would recommend to any young woman who is just struggling through the discernment of, feeling called toward more outward facing contributions in the world and also wanting to respond to a very deep call and beautiful call toward marriage and motherhood to seek out mentors who are in the field that you're looking at, who have truly and genuinely prioritized their vocation to motherhood in that, and look at specifically how they made that work. Ask them about their schedule, ask them about the career choices that they made, ask them about their academic track and how they were able to time that around the needs of their family, or if they did that after they started a family, how they were able to make hard decisions along the way. And
Yes.
I also would recommend the scholarship of Erica Bakayaki. She speaks about how couples should respond to the needs of the moment together as a single relationship unit, which means that day to day you're discerning with your spouse like who's going to put dinner in the oven,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for some families that might mean that, the woman is the primary baker, cooker, and the husband isn't, or it might be reversed for other families, or it might be a bit of both. And the reality is that in families, especially large families, it's a lot messier than a very strict um, sex role divide where
Yeah.
the woman does only a particular type of task, the man does a different type of task exclusively. My own family, I come from a family of five children, and my mother was one of those mothers who, and I'm very grateful that she did this because she was very present to attend to the educational and emotional and spiritual needs of myself and my siblings growing up. But she put aside her career as a computer engineer when my older brother was born, and she has been a full-time mom since. My dad is the primary breadwinner for our family, but my dad often does laundry. My mom is often doing things to support my dad, and this is the way that family works.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an idolized, completely structural separation of labor. It's messy, but it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people need to expect as they're entering into a relationship, entering into a marriage relationship specifically, because I think that complementarity is ill served unless we understand that complementarity rests upon shared mission. And marriage is based on the shared mission of the procreation and education of children. That is the purpose of marriage. We've forgotten that today. That has been understood as the purpose of marriage in the Christian tradition for centuries and centuries and centuries. And when we realize that shared mission implies shared tasks, you realize that there's something artificial about complete separations of such tasks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as a picture of the unity between Christ and his church, it's the body operating together, which is another example of like marriage exemplifies that to the world. And it's not you do this and you do this, but every single member is important. So, Rachel, you have so many great thoughts, and it's been great speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining the No I podcast. By the way, speaking of what you just mentioned, I have this on my desk. So, any other thoughts or resources that you would like to recommend for people, and we'll link them here in the show notes.
I think the most important thing that discernment depends upon is prayer. And no matter what your denominational background is, I would just encourage you to lean into the way that you converse with God. For me, it's sitting in adoration and allowing God to reveal to myself the desires of my heart, my talents, and how He desires me to apply them. You never know if you are called to be a Joan of Arc who had a vocation that was very different from the typical female role. God may be calling you to something radical. And I know that He is because He has an individual vocation for each and every one of us. So, really, just take this to prayer because you can't discern your vocation scrolling through Instagram. You can't discern your vocation browsing aesthetics. You discern your vocation in conversation with God.
Yeah, no. So well said. Well, Rachel, again, thank you so much for being on the Know I podcast today.
Thank you so much, Liberty, for having me.